Laxal, and the theme of his talk is, will you be a survivor of the last day? Thank you, Brother Laxal.
Wow, what a vital question in this time we're living in. Will you be a survivor of the last days? Now, Jehovah's Witnesses have been declaring worldwide for over 100 years that we are living in the last days, and soon a global paradise on earth will happen. Now, some could say, look, I've heard this warning for a long time from you people. And that's true. That word soon have been said many, many times in our talks, in our publications. And now we are just 2 days into a new year of 2022. How does that word soon take on even greater meaning today? And is there proof of that? If so, what do we need in our spiritual go bag for survival? Now, it would be good at this stage of the talk if we could travel back in history to the first Bible last days in Jesus' day. Now, Jesus was spot on then. He has been spot on also in our time. Back then, imagine that you were alive and in that first century, and you were one of Jesus' disciples, and you were one of his followers, and you were comfortable living in Jerusalem. Now, bear in mind, Jerusalem was a pretty secure place. Just some measurements to give you an idea of the place, the dimensions of the place. There was the east wall was about 460 meters long. The west went about 485 meters. Along the north, it was about 315 meters. To the south, it was 280 meters. The walls were about 30 meters high. That's about 10 stories if we try and picture a 10-story building. So would you have felt pretty secure? That's bigger than the pool fence height, isn't it? That's quite secure. You would have been secure within these massive walls. But then all of a sudden, Jesus is about to drop a bombshell of words to his listeners. His words gives an unbelievable description of what will happen to this structure, these walls that were there. If we look at Matthew chapter 24, and this is a well-known chapter in the Bible that we quote so many times and we talk to people about, but we're going to look, say, from the beginning of verse 1. Now, bear in mind, we try and get the setting here because the chapter before was chapter 23, and throughout that chapter, Jesus was just stating the deplorable condition that the nation of Israel had got in. Remember, he said that he wanted to gather them like a hen gathers its chicks. He was very, very upset, Jesus. So, in verse 1 of 24, let's look at the setting here. It says, now as Jesus was departing from the temple, his disciples approached to show him the buildings of the temple. So they thought, well, let's impress him here. He's just told us all the doom and gloom about how bad we are as a people. So they wanted to impress him a bit. In verse 1 it says, now here's the bombshell from Jesus. He didn't mince his word. He went straight to the point. In verse 2, in response he said to them, do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, by no means will a stone be left here upon a stone and not be thrown down. Now, when you think like that was a pretty big statement. Now, of course, is Jesus saying such a big thing like this, of course they'd wanted to know more, wouldn't they? Because in chapter 23, he raved on about all the terrible things that was happening. Now, the first two verses, he states what's going to happen. Now, if you look at verse 3, now we can get the setting now, because a bit later on, they were on the Mount of Olives, so they would have time to think about Jesus' words. What was he talking about? What, they got this Jerusalem's going to be wiped out? So they approached him. They wanted to know a bit more. So what did they ask him? Well, they approached, while he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately, saying, "Tell us then, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your presence and of the conclusion of the system of things?" And then Jesus lets it rip. He goes on to talk about their last days and then a global last days for us. And we look down in verse 4, Jesus says, in answer, Jesus said to them, "Look out that nobody misleads you. For many will come on the basis of my name, saying, 'I'm the Christ,' and will mislead many. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for these things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be food shortages and earthquakes in one place after another. All these things are beginning of pangs of distress." Now, further, Jesus knew, he also knew that he only had days to go before he would be killed. So he gave his disciples an amazing warning sign that would happen in their lifetime and what to do to survive. Now, Jesus knew they would need all the faith possible to be able to be fully in tune with these words. And if we look at these words it's stated there in Luke chapter 21. Luke 21, two powerful verses in 20 and 21. Now, this is a warning that they should have basically had plastered on their wall of the house they could look at every day as a reminder. He said, "However, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by encamped armies, then know that the desolation of her has drawn near. Let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains. Let those in the midst of her leave, and let those in the countryside not enter into her." Now, this is where faith to what Jesus said was so critical, because decades later, it meant their very survival. Their actions met their destiny, would result in what destiny would happen to them. So what happened to fulfill Jesus' words there, what he said in Luke 21, some 33 odd years later? Well, in 66 CE, the brutal, aggressive Romans under Cestius Gallus surrounded Jerusalem with what Jesus said, pointed stakes. Now, things look very grim, but for some unexplained reason, they withdrew. Now, this is where faith in what Jesus said was so important, because Jesus said nothing in his prophecy about the Romans' unexpected withdrawal in 66 CE. Like, he didn't say, look, when you see the pointed stakes, they'll go away for, a few years and they'll come back. No, he gave no warning like that at all. He just said to get out, flee to the mountains, and don't come back for anything, so to speak. Now, do you think that required faith then? Leaving this structure that you felt like so secured, the comfort of your home with your little ones, family, your elderly relatives, there may have been some there that would have been disabled, thriving businesses, lifestyle and flee to the challenges of mountain living, that would require incredible faith. Yes, faith was essential. Their action met their destiny. And sadly, many lost their lives when the Roman army returned in 70 CE and totally devastated the place. Now, Jesus even foretold that he even foretold basically what would happen, whether most of his followers would have listened to him. And he even said that not everyone was going to put faith in him in his warning to flee to the mountains. If we look again in the book of Luke, we look at Luke chapter 19, and there we'll see Luke 19, 43 and 44. And this is what he said, this is what he prophesied. He said, because the days will come upon you when your enemies will build around you a fortification of pointed stakes, and will encircle you and besiege you from every side. They will dash you and your children within you to the ground, and they will not leave a stone upon a stone in you, because you did not discern the time of your being inspected. So there's a prophecy, and that's exactly what happened. Yes, some failed to discern that window of time of 4 years, from 66 to 70 CE. Okay, now we can look back, we can read all that, we can say, yeah, that's amazing history. How silly were they? No faith. Ridiculous. We can just look back and ponder over all these thoughts that would run through our mind. But let's bring it down to our modern time. How can we avoid the same devastating mistake? What's a mistake? Lack of faith. Remember, we just sung earlier, to beg Jehovah, we're begging him to give us more faith so that we don't have a lack of faith. Do we have a window, time today, to get out of this system? Flee to the figurative mountain that is Jehovah's organization. Is there a window? Well, yes, there is. That window time today began in 1914. And that window wasn't just for 4 years, like it was in the first century, 66 to 70. That window from 1914 is still open right now. That's 108 years later. For anyone in the world, anybody in the world, to flee to Jehovah's mountain before it is closed, shut, sealed, keys thrown away, so to speak. History proves the greater part of Matthew chapter 24, which we read earlier from verses 4 to 8, has already happened since 1914. Since that time, 1914, we've had a massive increased spike in wars, earthquakes, famine, and pestilences. So then, that can't be ignored, like the pointed stakes in 66 CE. I mean, the sign back then were their stakes. Today, the signs are basically Matthew 24. That's just one of them, and we've got another one that we'll consider soon. See, back in 66, just picture you were there, and you had a thriving business. Your family was happy, good health, children happy, and you think 66, the Romans are there, you think, oh no, what's going to happen? All of a sudden they're gone. Then 67, nothing happens. 68, nothing happens. 69, nothing happens. I think Jesus got it wrong. He may have been out a bit. Some could have thought that way. Then in 70, whooshka, the unleashing of the brutal, aggressive Romans just flattened the place out. Now, interestingly, Revelation chapter 6, in the chapter 6 of Revelation, backed up Jesus' signs of Matthew 24. With what? With the 4 horsemen that are still riding, that figurative horses, 4 horses that are still riding since 1914, since that window time. And what are those 4 horses? Well, one of them is a white horse. And we know that pictures Jesus riding as a king, because that's when he became king in 1914. Then there was a red horse, and that depicts war and bloodshed. And when that horse started riding in 1914, it was bloodshed, okay, because that was the First World War, the greatest war ever at that time. Then the black horse, that was famine. Famine like never before, to the point where it progressed to the Great Depression throughout the world. And the last horse was a pale horse, and that denoted death and diseases and viruses that we are experiencing right now throughout the world. So, is our faith still strong enough to still see these figurative horses riding? They're riding full steam ahead. Is there further proof that we are deep in the last days? Yes, there is. In fact, these words in 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 1, if we could please have a look at that. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 1. I'll read it slowly because it mentions the term last days also. But know this, the Apostle Paul under inspiration's writing, that in the last days, critical times, hard to deal with, will be here. Now, Matthew 24 had 2 fulfillments. One was a Jewish system, first century, and the second major fulfillment is our time, globally. Now, interestingly, 2 Timothy 3, 1-5 didn't have a minor fulfillment in the first century. Its one and only fulfillment is our time today. So, when we think of that point alone, I mean, we think of the 5 verses there, or 4 verses from verse 2-5. Did you know that there are actually 19 attitudes and conditions in just those 4 verses mentioned that will be prevalent in these last days? Which one of those 19, we can't go through every one of them, we'll need an hour. Which one of those 19 conditions is your favourite, say, barometer that convinces you we are in the last days? Do you have a pet condition there that really impresses you? Interestingly, one dictionary defines a barometer as an instrument that measures atmospheric pressure, something that reflects changes in circumstances. My favourite verse or barometer is 3 words in verse 2. And those 3 words simply says, notice there, towards the end of verse 2, disobedient to parents. Now, the pressure of this barometer has certainly been changing daily, just like that dictionary definition gives. For example, the young generation, think about this, the young generation in the 40s, 30s, the 40s, the 50s, would you say they were different to the young generation today? And that's why I love witnessing to individuals that are in their 80s or 90s. And I usually throw a question at them, and put a question to them. It's something like, what was it like in your day when you were a little one or a teenager? Oh, and boy, they just open right up. They'll say things like, oh, when I was in primary school, we listened to our teacher, we respected our parents, we were petrified of the police, we'd never want to get in trouble with police, and it just goes on and on. They'll just tell you what it was like then. And how different today with the disobedient to parents. I mean, the Bible just mentioned disobedient parents, but then it goes disobedient to authority, to teachers. I remember when I went to school in primary and high school, if you gave cheek to the teacher, you got 6 of the best. That was a cane. I still look at my fingers and think back to those days. You never forgot it. Today, young ones, teachers are scared if they say boo to kids at school. That's how much the world has changed. And then we've got young ones today with a drug problem that they face that is so rampant throughout the world. Can you see why so many people are faint out of fear? They just don't know what the next day is going to bring. They're just not aware what the conditions that we're facing today is all about. How does that make you feel? Are you keen and ready to survive these last days? Some back in Jerusalem took the easy way out. What do we mean by that? Well, they opted to stay put. They were in their comfort zone. So in other words, Jesus' words to them just didn't suit them. It wasn't popular. I mean, think about it. You're comfortable, you're in a secure place, you're doing well, your business, your family's happy, everyone's good health, and all of a sudden you are told to look out for one sign. Jesus only gave them one sign. When you see those pointed stakes, and he gave one action to take, that was to run. Run to the point, or if you forgot something, don't worry about coming back. Leave it. So that really required faith, isn't it? So then, what about us today? Maybe we're thinking, well, we're in the last days. Yes, I know we're in the last days, Jehovah, but I'm comfortable the way things are, and I just like my normal routine of life today. Jehovah's clearly warning us today to not fall back into that same trap, to think that it's ages away and we get into this comfort zone. He has given us every clear sign we need. And this is the greatest time to show which side are we on, Jehovah or the enemy. Now, to be on Jehovah's side, what action do we need to take? What's the faith? What's our modern day pointed stakes today to look at, to do? Now, Jesus made it clear in Matthew 24. Paul backed it up in 2 Timothy chapter 3. And now further, the Apostle Peter, he comes along under inspiration, and he makes it like a threefold chord. You know, like if you got one chord, you do it up just twice, you do it up 3 times. That threefold chord is very, very hard to undo or to break. So the words of 2 Peter is that threefold chord. It just locks it in for our faith. And what are those words? Well, let's have a look, please, in 2 Peter chapter 3, and we'll see here what we encourage to do. Chapter 3, verse 11 and 12a. Here it states, since all these things are to be dissolved in this way, consider what sort of people you ought to be in holy acts of conduct. Holy acts of conduct and deeds of godly devotion, as you await and keep close in mind the presence of the day of Jehovah. And then also, please, could we have a look at verse 14? Therefore, beloved ones, since you are awaiting these things, do your utmost to be found finally by him spotless and unblemished and in peace. Remember at the beginning of this talk, we were reminded of that word soon. Has been mentioned many times since 1914 by Jehovah's people, and rightly so. Well, between now and the Great Tribulation, we are going to hear that word soon over and over again. Let's not get tired of it or complacent about the meaning of it. Remember, soon can mean any time. It can mean a few weeks. It can mean months. It can mean a few years. It can mean a period of time. The last days does have an expiry date. It had a start in 1914 and an end date, which we don't know. And that's where faith comes into it. Because if we don't know something, that's what faith means. The meaning of faith means you behold something that's not yet beheld. It's like, think in the world, you sometimes see shops, retail shops, and they have a big sign on it. And the big sign says, last day's sale. Now that last day's sale, does that go on indefinite? No. In the fine print it would have, well, valid from such and such date to such and such date. So just like the last days of the Bible, it's not a sign that we look at and think it's never going to end. It has an expiry date. Jehovah knows that. Christ knows that. We just have to be very close to Jehovah's organization and listen closely to all the information we get in the Watchtower, on the JW Broadcasting, and that's how we keep strong in our faith, and we keep that hope that alive right before us, and we won't get complacent, and we won't weaken off, because we need to remember one of the sins that Jehovah really detests is a sin of a lack of faith that really can draw us away from him. So may we keep saying to Jehovah, please guide me through these last days with a humble attitude. And we can also say to Jehovah, I want to be a survivor of these last days soon.
Thank you very much, Brother Laxell, for that very timely talk, and how you've explained how faith and action is crucial for our survival. So thank you very much for the effort you put in to help us this morning. So we'd also like to invite everyone to stay for our Watchtower study. So I'd invite Brother Earl to take us through that.
Thank you. Let's commence our Watchtower with a song number 68, Sowing Kingdom Seed. Let's sing that together, song number 68.
Seed of the truth has power to grow in hearts that are honest and true. Give of your best as you faithfully share work you've been given to do. How much will your works is successful may often depend much on you. Hearing will need your assistance to learn and to love what is true. So help them to deal pressures and doubts, certain to face on their way. Seed of the truth